and they would no longer be encumbered with big labor union contracts or health care obligations or interest on debt. They would be able to buy the assets without the liabilities and organize them in such a way to make cars profitably. Now, in order to do that, they would probably have to pay their workers a lot less than workers are being paid now, but at least they'd be working for companies that made cars profitably. And we'd probably end up with a lot more people working in the automobile industry than we have today. And the fact of the matter is, rather than making cars for Americans, we should be making cars to export. Because Americans, we don't really need any car. We have too many cars. I mean, we have, 2 or 3 cars per household at this point? I mean, you have, when the president makes a speech and he says, we need to restore credit. He keeps saying credit is the lifeblood of the economy. We need credit so Americans can go out and buy more cars. I mean, that's you can look at the United States and say, what's wrong with our economy? We don't have enough cars. We need more cars. I mean, that's the last thing we need. Now, we need to make cars. We know why we need to make cars because there's a lot of people in China that are still on bicycles. They need cars. We should be able to make cars for them and export them. We don't need them for ourselves because we own too many cars. We have too much everything. You know, if you ever seen some of these commercials, or not commercials, these television, the news stories, where when they foreclose on houses, they send these companies in and they got to, clean the places out and get them ready, And it's amazing to me, but they would go to these houses that people abandoned, and they're full of stuff. I mean, the TV sets are there. The stereos are there. There's clothes in the closets. Why didn't these people take that stuff? They didn't even want it. I mean, we got all this stuff, and it doesn't even matter. They just didn't even care about it. And all this stuff, of course, was bought with borrowed money. We didn't make any of it. We didn't have any money to pay for any of it. The last thing Americans need is to buy more stuff. But the government, part of the economic stimulus, right, in addition to the bailouts, and of course they want to bail out Wall Street investment banks. Why? Let them fail. What do we need them for? Why do we need Goldman Sachs? Why do we need Morgan Stanley? Let them fail. The government tries to blame all the economic problems that we have today on the fact that they let Lehman Brothers go out of business. Meanwhile, they bailed out everybody else and we're in this gigantic mess. Maybe it's not because they let Lehman fail. Maybe it's because of the other bailouts. But no, now they want to make us believe that since Lehman Brothers failed, they can't let anybody fail. We don't need all these investment banks. And if they go away, it's not going to mean that brokerage is going to stop, that investment banking is going to stop. It's just going to be done by somebody else. There are a lot of small firms out there like mine that are expanding, that will expand even more if the government gets out of the way. But instead, the government is rewarding the incompetent people and keeping them in business, and they're punishing all the competent people. Meanwhile, look at the bonuses. Look at the amount of money that is being paid to Wall Street executives using bailout money. I mean, how can these guys be entitled to make multi-million-dollar a year salaries when their companies are losing a fortune based on what they're doing? I mean, let them fail. Let them go out of business. But the stimulus, what is it that the government is trying to do with the stimulus? The government is trying to recreate the conditions that led to the crisis. Because when they talk about stimulating the economy, they're not talking about stimulating economic growth. They're talking about stimulating spending. They want us going back to the auto showrooms, back to the malls, and buying more stuff. And they want us going deeper into debt to pay for it. And if we're not willing to accumulate the debt on our own, well, then the government will do it for us. As if this is the secret. If they could just spend enough money, then the economy is just going to magically grow again. And that's all nonsense. The only reason it worked before, and it really didn't work, was because we were able to borrow the money from the rest of the world and spend it. And we were able to live in the delusion that we were getting richer even as we were getting poorer because we looked at our asset prices, right? We were looking at real estate and stock prices going up, and we said, hey, we're actually getting wealthier even as we were getting poorer because we were spending money instead of saving money. And as we spent money, we counted that spending as GDP. And so as long as our GDP was rising, we thought our economy was growing. But the whole time our GDP was actually going up, we weren't measuring real economic growth. We were measuring how much wealth we had been destroying or dissipating because we were simply spending. And we thought we were okay because some appraisers said that our house was worth more. or the stock market was still going up. But all that was an illusion, and now that those bubbles have burst, there's no way to go back to it. Stock prices, I don't care, you're going to have ups and downs, but stocks in the United States are still expensive. Based on any kind of historic measure of value, the PEs are high and the yields are low. Stocks are overpriced. Houses are overpriced. Our assets are still overpriced despite the fact that they've fallen. Meanwhile, our whole economy is phony. The malinvestments that we have now is this entire service sector economy. We built an economy based on the idea that we can borrow and spend money in perpetuity. And that was just as phony as the idea that real estate prices would always rise. So we have a lot of Americans that are working in jobs that they really shouldn't be in. We got a lot of Americans that work in retail, that work in shopping centers, that work in restaurants, that work in financial services. There are a whole host of Americans employed doing things that they really shouldn't do because, we're too broke to patronize their businesses. We need more Americans making stuff, producing things. And in order to have American labor available for productive capacity, they have to leave where they are right now. That somebody has to lose their job in the service sector in order to get a job in goods production. And of course, in order to get a job in goods production, we need capital. You can't produce anything without machines, without tools. Where's that stuff going to come from? You just can't wave a wand. You're going to have savings. Somebody's going to have to be able to borrow the money to make those investments, which means Americans are going to have to save their money. Or we're going to have to convince somebody in another country to take their savings and invest it in America, not just lend it to us. I had a debate on CNBC one time with Art Laffer. And it's about a 10-minute debate. The clip is on YouTube. And part of it, where he bet me that penny went into that Peter Schiff video. But in that whole debate, when I tried to point out that we were borrowing too much money, Art Laffer said that my nervousness about all the debt was wrong. And he said historically America borrowed a lot of money in the 1800s, and it was not a problem. We ran huge current account or deficits, or we borrowed a lot of money, and the economy was in great shape. So therefore, my criticism of our debt was wrong. Well, what Art didn't understand or didn't appreciate was the difference between what we did with the money. Back then, we borrowed money to make investments, to build infrastructure, to build factories, to build farms, to build a productive economy. We invested the money. We didn't just spend it on stuff. And when you borrow money and you invest in productive capacity, you have a real asset. And the asset can generate revenue. If we built a factory that manufactured widgets, we could sell the widgets to the British and to the French and earn enough money to pay back the money they loaned us and the interest. And we became the world's wealthiest economy because we borrowed to produce. What we've done recently is we've borrowed to consume. We didn't produce anything. We borrowed money and bought trinkets. We bought depreciating consumer goods. So how can we possibly pay the money back? We didn't acquire any income-producing assets to pay the money back. So if we're going to rebuild a viable economy, and if we don't have our own savings, we're going to have to convince the Chinese and the Japanese to build factories here. Well, why would they want to do that? With the high regulations that we have right now, with the high taxes that we have right now, we're just not competitive. So the only way that we're ever going to rebuild a sound economy in the United States is, number one, we're going to have to stop all the stimulus and stop the bailouts and let the free market work. We have to understand that what's happening right now is not the problem, it's the solution. The problem was the bubble blowing up, not the deflation. We have to allow the pain, no matter how unpleasant it is. We have to understand that anything we do to delay this is going to make it worse. When you have President Obama is talking about how everything is different than George